This is the voice of reason with Andy Hooser.
Yeah, truth, reason, common sense. It's what we do on this program, especially for a Friday, man. You see the light at the end of the tunnel. You are there, probably already at the beach, already at the lake, or on the road, hanging out with family and friends, doing your thing. And if that's the case, then happy Independence Day weekend to you. It's great to have you here. You can find us on our website, HooserReason.com. I want to talk about the celebrations going on in Washington, D.C. this weekend. Also, the mindset of you and the average voter across the country as we go into midterm season, the 4th of July celebration, and a heck of a lot more. That's where I want to go to with our next guest on the program.
Let's go to the Red State Spirits Hotline.
That's right. Our friends over at Red State Spirits, redstatespirits.com. Make sure to get your true American spirits right now. Must be 21 years or older. Please drink responsibly. Our guest on the program, if you've listened to this program for any stint of time, you know that she's been a guest for years. In fact, all the way back when she was with the College Republicans at Kansas University here in my home state. Issues now, she is a political reporter for the Daily Mail. Really happy to have on here Victoria Churchill. Victoria, how are you, my friend?
Always great to chat with you, Andy. Doing well over here.
That's awesome. Always great to chat with you as well. Happy Independence Day weekend to you. I'm excited because even though there is a lot of divisiveness, a lot of crazy going on in the world today, I'm starting to. It took a little bit. I think it was a little bit delayed. I'm finally starting to feel the excitement, the energy, the patriotism for the 250th birthday. What are you feeling on your end?
Well, there's definitely lots of events coming up here in D.C. Of course, on July 4th itself, we're going to have or at least what's promised to be the greatest fireworks show ever. So, that'll definitely be one people are going to be staying up for. It's going to be a little bit later than in past years. It usually runs around 9 or 10 o'clock, and I think we're expecting some remarks from the president. And, he does tend to talk a little bit long. As somebody that's covered his events all over the country, he does like to hold an audience's attention. But then, of course, we are expecting the show itself around 11 o'clock Eastern here on July 4th itself on Saturday. But yeah, other than that, there's lots of great events going on. Of course, not only in D.C., but elsewhere across the country, people are participating in, including the president. He was at the Theodore Roosevelt Library just a few days ago, so he's definitely making the rounds to make sure not all the attention is here on the East Coast, but making sure that, of course, it's America's celebration, which is, as I like to put it, real America, not just all the people around where I live.
Yeah, well, and where you live in Washington, D.C., it's a little strange anyway, so it is nice to see what's going on around the country for sure. But I got to ask you real quickly, though, in Washington, the Great American State Fair, all the festivities going on in Washington, D.C., to be honest, the media hasn't really covered much of that, and it's going to be great to hear President Trump speak tomorrow. It's going to be great to see the fireworks celebration a little bit later than normal. But how are things in D.C. with the State Fair that's been happening and all the daily celebrations?
Well, something that I definitely paid attention to was, for example, Pennsylvania, of course, a state that is so key in our nation's founding. I actually, up until a couple months ago, I hadn't even been to the hall where the Declaration was signed, so that was really cool. I kind of did that on my own time on a few days that I had off in April, so that was really neat to see. But, Pennsylvania, up until a few days ago, hadn't had a display at the Great American State Fair, and so something that I thought was very notable was that Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, a Democrat, as well as Dave McCormick, the Republican, they banded together with quite a few of the industry groups from the state to make sure that their state was well represented. And that was kind of on the backs of the reluctance of the state's incumbent Democrat Governor Josh Shapiro to actually send any representation from Pennsylvania to the state fair.
Golly, so late in the game. Why is that? And why did it take a while for us to actually see this? I know we kicked off a lot of the patriotism with the Freedom 250 UFC fight, which was, by the way, unbelievable. It was so much fun to watch. But why is it taking so long to actually get into the holiday mode, I think, for some of these states, and especially for some of these bluer states?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think for a lot of people, they are honestly just kind of a little bit caught up just living their lives. I think it's interesting because, as I mentioned, I think to you just before we got on air, I have been doing some travel, speaking to voters, both in red states and blue states. In South Carolina, I talked to Democrats and Republicans. I went to an event for a potential 2028 Democrat contender that was also being held just a few days before the Republican primary runoffs there for particularly the governor's race was kind of the main thing that I was covering there. But, it's interesting because I think even in red states, like South Carolina, Democrats, care about kind of the day-to-day issues. But when I was talking to Democrats on the streets in New York, in the middle of Manhattan, where I was covering the race to replace Jerry Nadler, of course, a longtime senior Democrat member of the caucus, for them, it was all about Donald Trump and just, their thoughts on everything that he's doing horribly for the country. But, as I like to put it again, in real America, people, want to talk about gas, and they want to talk about roads, and they want to talk about real issues rather than just hatred of one person.
Yeah.
Just, really visceral hatred, to be honest. And then for also kind of this idea of the American dream, even in more red states, even Democrats were, I think, a lot more enthusiastic about the prospect. They're like, the American dream might be a little bit different, but it definitely still exists, versus Democrats that I talked to in New York were like, no, Trump's ruined everything. America's never coming back from this. So I thought that was interesting to see those perspectives, because I think, particularly in the media, so many times we are just caught up in this, of course, it's called the Acela corridor bubble. So, between DC and New York. And that's why in my reporting, I just love going out and talking to real, regular, everyday Americans.
Yeah.
Just because I think their perspectives don't get told in national or in international media nearly enough.
No, well, you're right. We don't get the perspective of what's going on in everyday America, because we always hear about the narrative from the mainstream media, which is fueling the hatred, fueling the division, which is why we probably haven't seen as much patriotism this year as we probably could, which, Victoria, is really sad. I mean, it's America's 250th birthday this year, and we really haven't started to see the patriotism and the celebration for America's 250 and 4th of July until really this week.
Yeah, I think so. And, again, I think just even when you look at the politics, I think it's really interesting because so many states have had their primary elections up until this point, and then July itself kind of has a little bit of a pause. I think there's only 1 week that there actually are primary elections, and then it kicks off again with a crazy amount of primaries in August, including Kansas, and then, kind of going a couple states blast even into September. States like New Hampshire, for example, they have a very late primary. And then from there, it's off to the races for November. Andy, I'm sure people like you and I know that it's quite hard to get people to think about politics. Even really at this point in the summer, I was just doing some math for another story that I was doing, and we are actually now less than 4 months away from the primary. So, we've got July, August, September, from November, we've got July, August, September, October, and November.
Yeah.
So 4 whole months left. There's definitely going to be a lot of things that people are paying attention to. But again, I think regular voters outside of these smaller bubbles, they just want to live their lives, and they care about the day-to-day issues that their lives are affected by. And, that was, I think for me, that was really interesting to see when I was covering this gubernatorial runoff. It's so hard to get people to vote just in a primary election, but in a primary runoff election. And South Carolina was super unique because their primary was their runoff was 2 weeks after the primary.
Yeah.
And early voting so I was there the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday before their Tuesday primary, and early voting had actually already ended. So their primary runoff early voting was just about a week after their regular primary. So, a lot of that, when I was talking to both the candidates as well as their supporters, were like, it's just about turnout, because people think, oh, we've already voted, we're just voting for you again in November. This was, the candidates were telling me this, and they're like, no, we have to make people realize that they have another election to go vote in.
Right.
So.
Yeah, there's been a lot of burnout, I think, on both ends of the aisle. It's been a constant political season, and with how quickly that Donald Trump moves in his administration, I think people are overwhelmed maybe with what's going on in Washington, for sure, with how quickly and how many things have been addressed. But let's talk about the midterm season for a moment. With you traveling around the country, talking to red states, blue states, and voters all over the place, what side do you feel is excited right now? Traditionally, midterm season is for the minority party. Democrats traditionally may do well, but is that the case? Are they fired up, or are the Republicans going to be the ones that actually rise up, get engaged, and maintain their majorities?
I think both parties are definitely engaged. I think it's stupid to kind of ignore the amount of energy that is on the far left. We've seen, I think it's over 20 candidates now across the country, these really self-proclaimed democratic socialists in a lot of cases, have beat out long-term Democrat incumbents. So that's, I think, really interesting. The question is whether that trend will continue in more moderate districts where, these people could actually oust a Republican incumbent in November, or whether they are kind of, whether the cities are just going further left. And so, at the end of the day, if that's a Democrat vote, it'll end up being a Democrat vote even after these elections are carried out. But I think if there is kind of a group of 20 or so of these crazy progressives that go in and particularly join up with some of the people we already have on Capitol Hill, I think even if Democrats, by some luck for them, manage to get enough people out nationwide to actually go ahead and take, for example, control of the House, I think you'd actually see kind of a little bit of the opposite of what we have here on the Republican side, where, there's even now, even though Republicans control all three branches of government in D.C., there's still gridlock. I think even if Democrats are able to take back one of the chambers, whether that's the House or the Senate, there'll still be so much gridlock because they're progressives, which, even if that caucus grows in number, they're still going to fight against whoever ends up in leadership. Like, a lot of these people, even in their campaigns, are like, I'm not going to back Hakeem Jeffries for speaker. And so it's just going to be the same thing that we see on the Republican side, but just on the Democrat side.
That is a really interesting perspective. I want to break some of that down when we come back around the corner. Got to take a break with Victoria Churchill right here on your Friday for The Voice of Reason. Stay here.
This is The Voice of Reason with Andy Hooser. This segment of The Voice of Reason brought to you by Hooser Health. For your holistic health remedies, find more online at HooserHealth.com.
Yeah, welcome back into the program. Got a few minutes left as we're wrapping things up today for your Friday. Happy Independence Day weekend to you. America's 250th birthday. We are officially here, baby. I know you're excited about it, as am I. It's time to wave that American flag, enjoy some of those true American spirits, and watch some fireworks go off in your community. Dang straight. That's how we celebrate. We're hanging out right now with Victoria Churchill, great friend of the program for a very long time, all the way back to her college days here in Kansas at Kansas University. Now she is a political reporter for the Daily Mail, and we appreciate her. Victoria, you brought up something really interesting as we went into that last break, was the fact that even with this quote-unquote socialist takeover of the Democrat Party, and depending on how many actually get into office in Washington in November for the midterm season, there probably will be more socialists in there, the rise of the AOCs and the Zoran Mamdanis and the Ilhan Omars and so on and so forth. There'll probably be a larger voice of those within the Democrat Party. But, as you mentioned, they are fighting against the establishment Democrats that are desperate to maintain control of the party right now. So even if we do see the Democrats, God forbid, take the majority in one of the chambers, how much productivity will you actually see, or will they bicker amongst themselves because the party is going to be in the middle of a civil war?
Right, absolutely. And I mean, this is what Democrats tried to do just a few months ago, for example, on the border security issue, right? They've said there wasn't going to be any kind of funding for DHS, which of course include not only ICE, which some of their criticisms were with, but also things like TSA and things like FEMA, right? That's a concern, even that's been raised by Republicans, is that FEMA, at least in the state that it was about a month ago, is not equipped to handle, hurricane and tornado season that's just down the road, for example, right? And so this is, when we talk about this DC gridlock actually having tangible impact on people's lives, when there's disaster aid that's held up for weeks, if not months, getting to people that really need it, that's a really tangible impact that a lot of people, particularly in states like, for example, Oklahoma and Kansas, are going to feel. But even on the East Coast, right, we remember Hurricane Helene and all of that, and how there was really very limited, if any, response. I remember going down, I think it was nearly a month after the hurricane struck, and, a lot of the areas had not been really touched. Like, I remember going through some of the areas in Asheville, and outside of just what, local people just banding together were able to clear up, a lot of things were still uncleared. There was, I think, some kind of like federal, whether that's FEMA or, other security personnel basically going around and looking at some of these sites. But it seemed like a lot of that hadn't happened weeks, if not months, after the disaster struck.
Yeah.
And so, that's really what, again, in this term, it's been the Democrats. Like, when they hold up things, that's what they're holding up. And, I challenge them to actually go out and go to some of these areas themselves and actually see the real world impact of what their vote, or a lot of times reluctance to vote, is actually leading to.
Well, yeah, and the mindset of the people that are frustrated because they're not getting the resources that they need because of them being held up, thinking that they're doing themselves a service of making them angry at the Trump administration, when people realize that, hey, Democrats are holding up this entire process for them to get the emergency services. We have wildfires in Nebraska. We have tornadoes in Kansas. We have wildfires in Oklahoma. We have drought in Texas. There's a lot of issues going on right now, and they're not addressing a lot of these issues. Victoria, we got just about a minute left here or so. Last question for you, though. But you, as you mentioned, being an immigrant yourself, your husband being an immigrant, and going around talking about America's 250th birthday, are you optimistic that we're going to see another 250 years as a nation?
Yeah, I believe in America, and I'm excited that when I actually go out and talk to real Americans, a lot of them seem to think so too, as long as they're not too caught up in everything, whether that's social media narrative or mainstream media narrative. As long as they're not buying into that too much, and they're, investing in their communities, and they're participating in, a lot of people my generation, for example, complain about not having a village. And so if they're being actively participating in actually building that village, I think they're still more hopeful than they are pessimistic.
It's a great point. I love it. It is Victoria Churchill, political reporter for the Daily Mail. You can find all her information on the Daily Mail's website. It's always great to chat with you, my friend. We've done it since you were in college here in Kansas at Kansas University, which is awesome, and we always enjoy having you on the program. Happy Independence Day. Got to get you back on the show again soon.
Happy Independence Day, Andy. Hope you enjoy some great fireworks, and I'm sure we'll chat soon.
Yeah, you betcha. I'm excited for those fireworks. That's what I live for every single year. And happy Independence Day to you as well, Victoria Churchill. And by the way, go and check out her latest piece with the Daily Mail, latest poll of the younger generation, my generation, her generation, on where we see the optimism. Are we optimistic about the future of the country? Are we optimistic about the direction of the country moving forward? She has her latest piece up on there with the Daily Mail, and you can check that one out. But until then, we are out of time. I want you to go and enjoy those fireworks, enjoy the barbecue, enjoy the reason why we're celebrating America's 250th birthday. That is the coolest thing in the world. Happy Independence Day. Happy 250. We'll see you back on the radio. Until then, it is the Voice of Reason. I'm Andy Hooser. We'll see you on the radio. Bye.